Hi, I'm Husnara, the editor of Cheeky Little Careers. For my latest video, I'm joined by aspiring solicitors Yun, Oktay, and Zach. And together we're going to be interviewing Caroline Ramsay, who is a partner at TLT Solicitors. Before we get Caroline to say a few words about herself, why don't I get the students to say hello and say a few words about themselves first? So Yun, why don't you start?
Hi everyone, my name's Yun. I'm currently an MA law student at the University of Law in London. I had a long career before that as a legal journalist. So I am, as a mature student, changing careers to law. Thank you.
Yun, we actually used to work with each other. She forgot to mention that bit. So we're former colleagues. So it's lovely to have you here, Yun. Thank you for joining us. Oktay, how about you?
Hi, everybody. So my name is Oktay. I'm also a career changer. I have almost 5 years of experience in the higher education sector in London, more specifically with marketing events, recruiting students internationally as well. But from the past 1 year, I've been in a part-time GDL course in the University of Law as well.
Thank you very much. And last but no means least, Zach, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Zach. Finally, I'm studying politics and international relations at the University of Cambridge. It's a non-law degree, but I'm hoping to embark on a career in commercial law after graduation.
So Caroline, you're confronted by 3 non-law students, which is really interesting. And we can talk a bit about that later, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because you've had a very successful career and doing some really interesting work, which we're going to talk about shortly. But how did you get here?
Just to introduce myself, so I am Caroline Ramsay, and I'm a partner at TLT, and I head up the international trade team and also the government and trade practice, which sits over that. I think it's been nearly a 17, 18-year career, so it's been going for a while now, at the risk of revealing how old I am. And how did I get into law? Actually, I didn't really want to be a lawyer when I was at school. I wanted to be a doctor, and I did all of my work experience in hospitals and things like that. And then I started my 6th year module just at the same time I was starting to apply to universities. I did a 6th year module in biology and realized I hated it. And apparently that's what the whole medical degree was going to be like. And so I realized I had to do a pretty quick career change or career planning change. So I started thinking about what other degrees I could do, and I picked law because it's quite versatile.
Zach, you had a question, didn't you, for Caroline about challenges?
As someone who's yet to enter the legal sector, I was wondering what the biggest career-related challenge you've had to overcome was, and also how did you go about overcoming it?
I think probably the biggest challenge I had overcoming happened quite early in my career when I realized I qualified into the wrong discipline. It wasn't for me. And I think that is quite an important consideration and concern for all aspiring lawyers and future lawyers when they're doing their traineeships, because you only maybe get a chance to do 4 different seats if you're on one of the more regimented trainee placements. And so how do you really know after only 6 months if it's the right thing for you? And I had always wanted to be a litigator, and I did 2 litigation seats when I was a trainee, and I loved it. I absolutely loved being on my feet in court. And when I qualified, I was getting loads of court experience. So I was like traveling the country, going all around all the Scottish Sheriff courts and getting to do trials and different hearings, and I loved it. And then I moved just before I became 1 year qualified to another firm to do commercial litigation, but this time it was all defense stuff. It was personal injury. Never got to be in court, and I just wasn't enjoying it. I wasn't flourishing in it. I wasn't being very successful in it, in all reality. And at that point, I did really start to rethink, well, maybe the law is not the right thing for me. And then I got a great opportunity to move into a different discipline, like public law and European law at that time, within the same firm. And so I took a bit of a gamble and I moved, and I never looked back. It just suited me so much more. And so I suppose what I would say is, it's a valid worry to have for all students, to make sure that you do qualify into the right one. But if you don't, it's not the end of the world. You can still make lateral moves.
Talking of career changes and being a mature candidate, you had a question, didn't you, about that very topic?
What advice would you give to a mature female students who are changing careers to law?
Don't ever lose faith that you're doing the right thing. Don't ever start thinking you're maybe not doing the right thing, because I would imagine, like, when you're at university, you'll be surrounded by people that are, at much, are younger than you and at earlier stages in their lives, and you might, it's a point to wonder what you're doing and maybe you've made a mistake. But I would say, like, absolutely not. The skills that you have got from your past job are so valuable to employing law firms. These are life skills that you just can't learn at university, and I think that is going to be really attractive to law firms. I've recruited quite a few, and I've got a few in my team still that are second careers, and you can really see, the skills that they bring from their previous jobs, and they're really valuable. And also, if you've got family, I would say that you will be setting an amazing example for your children. So my mum did this, and my dad actually. So they both went back to school. They went to university for the first time. They'd never been before, both to study law when I was 6 years old and graduated when I was 10. So I watched them go all the way through the exams, the traineeship, and it really helped me understand the expectations of what I would need to do to be successful in my degree and my career. And I learned, they just showed me courage, perseverance, and ambition, and so that they were really important lessons for me to learn as a young girl. So
I think by the age I become qualified, if everything goes well, my daughter will be the same age as you.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Thank you very much for that.
So without doing the hard sell, because we don't believe that at Cheeky Little Careers, what attracted you to TLT?
What attracted me to TLT? So I'd been in my last firm for 15 years, and I started thinking, I want to change, and if I don't move now, I'm never going to move. So I started looking at other firms, and for me, I had criteria for where I wanted to go. I was interested in the quality of work and the quality of clients I got to work for, and I was interested in culture. One of my former partners had just moved to TLT and suggested an introduction, and at the time, I was like, "Who are TLT?" I'd never really heard of them. And then I realized they were on some of the big panels that my firm was on, big government panels. And I thought, that's really quite cool that they've got on there. And I've never really heard of them. And they're at the time in my head, I was like, they're alongside the big firms. And that was enough to get me interested to go, because, my former partner had told me all about their great culture. And I realized, obviously, they had similar clients to the ones I was used to working for. And when I met the partners at TLT in my first meeting, I really did like them. I really hit it off with them. I loved the ambition and the entrepreneurialism that they were showing. They were doing really great things, bigger things than I would have imagined for a firm that I'd apparently never heard of. So I really did like them, but I was speaking to two other firms, and they were like much bigger. They were very different in comparison to what I thought of TLT at the time and what I understood of TLT. And so for me, I was still really keen on them because they were big London players, and the quality of the work and the clients was a given. So I actually turned down my first offer from TLT, wow, which I'm so embarrassed about now. But I turned down my first offer, but luckily for me, they persevered. And so their dinner was arranged between my now group head and the managing partner, and we went out for dinner. And they were really good. They told me all about the firm's plans, and their strategy. And the managing partner, he basically challenged me to explain why I couldn't accept the job. So I sat there and I gave him all my reasons, like, oh, well, I'm not ready to give up on the international work and the international travel. And he's like, well, why? What do you mean give up on it? Of course you don't need to give up on it. That's exactly what we want you to do with us. And so he had a really good, incredible answer for every justification I offered up. And then I realized, I don't really know what my problem is here. And I realized it was my ego that was stopping me from taking the job. Wow. It was because of my perception of what TLT was. And, otherwise I was stopping me from taking what was otherwise a brilliant job with really nice people, very well remunerated. And so I accepted the offer immediately, and I've totally never looked back.
Caroline, you mentioned briefly about the culture, and obviously I've been researching the company, just to introduce myself a little bit more. And I read that the culture is described as very down to earth, how would you describe it? What is your take on this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would definitely agree it's down to earth. It's very, very friendly, and the people are very, very approachable, and there's no arrogance of the people that are in TLT. Because, and maybe that's because of the very fast growth the firm has had, you know, but there's no sort of like, we are TLT and we believe we should be treated a certain way. It's that the people there are very, you know, everyone works hard and they're very supportive with each other. And I guess maybe being the underdog sometimes is actually, you know, it's pretty good for the culture. It's quite an exciting place to be as a result of that. And it's genuinely really inclusive as well.
As a trainee solicitor, what is the approachability to somebody who's going to be even more senior than an associate to sort of go to them and ask them a question? Because as somebody who's a career changer and doesn't really have experience in a law firm, and if I don't know something and I just need an answer, I presume I would be a little bit nervous, but would I be able to go to somebody like you for advice to learn something new?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, that's another thing that, you know, I think is really good about TLT, that there's not much of a focus on hierarchy. I mean, obviously we have it in different job roles, but there is certainly no sort of unwritten rule that if you're a trainee, you don't speak to the partners. I mean, you know, I work directly with all the lawyers in my team on a one-to-one basis for various different projects and reasons, including the trainees. And I know that's the same across other teams. And we're also, I mean, I think a lot of firms are like this now as well, but we sit open plan. So there's no sort of like the partner sits in a room and everyone else is somewhere else. Like you will be, and we're all mixed up. So I can quite often be sitting, you know, with my entire team around me, and people will lean over and ask questions, and it's actively encouraged. So I would definitely say that you shouldn't ever be worried about, you know, approaching a partner or any other member of a law firm in that regard.
I also would like to know more about, you know, what kind of student joining TLT as a trainee expect. For example, it's just a little description of what a trainee's day-to-day work is like, or how do they engage with other members of the firm.
The quality of work is phenomenal. You get a chance to work for a really good range of different clients, like from FTSE companies to, you know, central government departments. And I think that will be really good in terms of variety of work. It'll be a really supportive working environment. You know, as I just mentioned in response to Oktay's question, you will be working with lots of different people and will be supported in the learning. You get very much like encouraged to learn on the job as well. So there'll be different tasks like research, but you'll get stretched to actually get given, you know, contracts to review, but you'll be shown how to do it first, and then you'll get a chance to do it yourself. And so I think that in terms of a learning opportunity there, it will be very hands-on and quite practical. You'll have access to really good resources as well for that learning, in terms of like if you need to do any research. I think you'll have quite a good support network around you of the other trainees, because we always have quite a big intake as well. So there will be a good support network and social life, maybe even with the other trainees. And it genuinely is a really diverse and inclusive, you know, workforce that we have. The firm is, I know lots of firms say they're inclusive, and then are not really, or it's lip service, but TLT is a very inclusive place, and we've got loads of different employee diversity network events and network meetings that happen. And even just down to the little things, like TLT recently introduced all these new coffee machines, and they've started putting non-dairy milk in the coffee machines, so that people who've got like are either vegan or like me have like dietary requirements, right? They get to feel included and get to have the same kind of coffee that everyone else goes and gets. And I think that's these little things that really makes a difference.
Yeah. Can I just ask a cheeky question? What are the common working hours for trainees? Because I've heard people always warn me that it's quite grinding when you first start the career.
Yeah, I was really worried about that as well when I was a trainee, but I have to say I never, when I was a trainee, ended up doing an all-nighter or anything like that. And I don't think I really have ever done an all-nighter in my entire career. I mean, yes, you will have to do some long hours and stuff like that occasionally if a project demands it, but there's no culture of sort of like, you know, the person that stays in the office the longest is the most hardworking. It's like, actually, if you're there really late, people will ask questions and be like, well, are you all right? What are you doing? Because you've either got too much work to do and it's not being spread around equally amongst the team, or there's a problem and if things are taking longer, then we need to know about it so that we can support on it. So I would say don't worry about the working hours. There may be the odd spike, but it's not a standard. It's pretty. You should expect 9 to 5, basically.
It's interesting to find out that after qualifying, you specialized in litigation, but then you decided to specifically focus on international trade. So I was wondering why you came about to that decision.
I moved into a role which was focusing on European law and public law. And I really, really enjoyed it. And so that is where I stayed doing that for several years. And then obviously Brexit happened. And as a European state aid specialist, when Brexit happened, I was like horror struck. I was like, oh my God, my entire career is going to be over. But actually, the more I realized is that state aid is basically subsidy law under international trade. So when I was a law student, the whole degree was very focused on European law, and it has been for many, many lawyers in the UK, who are still practicing. They've grown up as a lawyer through with European law, but now we very much have the international laws to look to instead of European, and the European Union took care of a lot of the international negotiations for the UK before Brexit. And so there was a natural sort of organic change to the legal profession after Brexit. Those that had specialized in European law would now be required to advise on international trade law. And so that was how I then moved to be doing more international trade work. That is obviously where I am now. So I think all careers have quite an organic growth to them. You don't always end up where you think you will when you start out.
So I understand your firm has recently won a coveted mandate to advise the UK government on a trade deal with India. That's really a very great project to work on. So well done. And so I would like to know, what does this work involve on a day-to-day basis, and how trainee solicitors contribute to this?
It's a really exciting project. We've got quite a few now. It's not just India. We've got some other countries that we're helping the government and providing advice for in terms of their negotiations for trade agreements. The work is very varied. It can range from calls to give verbal advice on the phone, sometimes preparing written opinions on all sorts of different areas, because a free trade agreement is enormous. They've got a chapter which covers every part of a market, basically. And so the substance of the law can actually be very, very different, depending from one instruction to another. And then so how the client will want that reported will also vary. So there might be an opportunity to get involved in doing research in relation to some of the legal questions, particularly in international trade law. It moves very quickly, so lots of research is needed sometimes. There'll be a chance to write written advice. We also do sort of, training events, workshops where we will work with a client, either to train them in a new subject of law or to workshop a particular problem and find a solution. And so we engage staff from all levels in that. It's certainly not something that's just limited to the partners. Also, for the international trade work, you'll get to work with foreign lawyers from other law firms as well, which is really good. So our partner law firms that we work with for international trade work are based in Washington, DC and Toronto. And then for some of the projects like India, we also work with Indian law firms. So it's really great to meet people from different parts of the world and to hear about how things are done in other countries. And we work really joined up. It's not one firm does this and one firm does that. I've currently got a junior lawyer in my team working and being supervised by a partner in Washington, DC, and they're working in a multidisciplinary team, which is quite exciting.
How lawyerish is trade law?
There's a lot of law. I would say it's quite different from M&A and corporate work. And a lot of people come to the team for that because they want to be reading law and legal updates. And so it will depend on the particular job. I mean, we've just done a job over the last week where, I mean, it was properly a bit like being back at university, delving into cases from the WTO. But not all the jobs are like that. But I think it's quite interesting for that reason. And the law does always change. You know, there's some areas of law where you can still delve into the cases, but the cases might be 150 years old. It's like,
right.
Not with trade law. It's all pretty new, it's fast moving, and it changes a lot.
The Russia-Ukraine war. It's so important and obviously very terrifying as to what's going on. But how is the invasion impacting law firms? And what are the most interesting points from the perspective of law students beyond the talk of sanctions, etc.?
One of the really big impacts for the legal profession was like all of these law firms pulling out of Moscow, because I think there had previously been a bit of an expansion into Russia. And that's obviously had a really terrible effect for the lawyers that are based there. It will also, I think, going forward, slightly change the legal market and maybe the opportunities for people who are doing traineeships in the big international firms, because previously I think there was an opportunity to do exchanges and go and work in these foreign offices, and that really attracts a lot of candidates. But I think unless there's quite a quick resolution, I can't see any of these law firms going back into Moscow really quickly. And so that's going to limit the ability to do that for law students. I mean, the sanctions and the trade restrictions that have been imposed, again, they're changing on a daily basis. It's a very interesting thing to study and to advise on from a legal perspective. But there are very major practical and commercial implications as a result of these trade restrictions. So even if you're not an international trade lawyer, I would imagine that lawyers all across the country and the world right now will be advising clients on certain commercial implications as a result of trade restrictions. For example, certain products are now no longer able to be sold into Moscow. So you don't need to be advising a Russian entity. You might well be advising a US entity that wanted to sell certain components, and now they might have contracts which are going to get breached. So the ramifications are going to be so wide from this.
And finally, just change the subject completely to a topic that's very close to my heart, which is diversity and inclusivity. I wanted to talk to you about neurodiversity, because I've always had more of a focus on disability in the context of my own sort of experiences of having rheumatoid arthritis. So it's a visible physical disability. And I'm less familiar with this area. What is neurodiversity, and why is it such an important topic for you? Because I know that you've mentioned it in previous interviews with other platforms.
I think neurodiversity is like this idea that it's, people experience and interact with the world around them in different ways because of the makeup of the brain, whether that's biochemical makeup or not. And so people use the term neurodiversity or neurodivergence, a divergence of the norm, to describe. I don't really like using the word conditions because it sounds like people are like burdened by it, and that's not always the case. Things like autism, being on the autistic spectrum, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, also acquired neurodiversity, which is that can be mental illness, it can be injury, maybe from someone having a stroke. Sure. That's another form of neurodiversity, and I am very passionate about it as well, because about a year ago, maybe just slightly longer than a year ago, I was diagnosed with ADHD at the ripe old age of 40. That I didn't realize I'd had ADHD, and it was because I was homeschooling my two boys, and I realized they must have ADHD, and so we got them referred. And when I was filling in all the questionnaires for them, I was thinking, sounds a lot like me. Right. And so I got diagnosed. And the reason I don't like referring to it as a condition is because I don't feel afflicted in any way. If anything, I feel like maybe the ADHD, looking back, is it's definitely resulted in some of my bigger successes.
Yeah.
It was probably, I believe the ADHD, looking back, was probably the reason I wasn't flourishing in my new role when I changed it 1 year PQE, because before I was like in really fast pace, I was doing advocacy, I was on my feet, I can think quite quickly on my feet. So I was doing something that appealed to my strengths. And then suddenly I was sitting doing defense work, just churning through pleadings and just getting very bored, because, if I'm not interested in what I'm doing as an ADHD person, it's really hard to focus. And so, it's been a really enlightening experience for me, because it's shed a lot of light on the path my career has taken, and it's probably a lot of it's been caused by the ADHD. Some people believe that if you're neurodivergent, then you can't have a career in law, and that's absolutely wrong. After I sort of came out, I was approached by all sorts of people all across the profession, internally within the firm and in different firms, saying, quietly confiding in me, going, I'm dyslexic, I've got ADHD, I've got autism, but I don't want to tell anyone. What would the people say if they knew I was dyslexic? I want to be a contracts lawyer. And I just think, there's a huge job for us to do here to remove the stigma, because you absolutely can be a contracts lawyer and have dyslexia. And, we've got them in our firm. And of course, like, if your brain works slightly different to someone else's, you might need more support doing one thing than another. But actually, everyone's like that, whether they're neurodivergent or not. And I don't believe in the word neurotypical, because I think that every brain is like a fingerprint. And really, if we just stop asking everyone to be an all-rounder, because let's be honest, that doesn't really exist, and we encourage people to be open and honest about what they're good at and what they're not, I think, it would be a lot easier to sort of get the best out of people. But invest some time in learning where your strengths and weaknesses are, and then play to your strengths, because you will have a lot. And if you play to your strengths, then you could be very successful.
And that applies to career changers and mature candidates as well. In fact, all candidates. So that's a really nice way to end the interview, because I'm worried that we're running over our allotted time slot. Zach, are you convinced to become a lawyer now?
I think that
non-law undergrad.
I think that made it for me. But I think thank you so much, Caroline. It was so insightful to kind of get your perspective on both your early career, but also midway through your career. And I think that it's really nice to see that your interests are always organically being shaped rather than being fixed at a certain point in time. So that was really nice to hear from you. So thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all as well.
Thank you.